I am the Mythbreaker. I'm the Mythbreaker. Hey, look, if you're going to dial in using testosterone replacement therapy, meaning you feel good, H&H is in range, you don't have high blood pressure, you're not retaining a ton of water, but importantly, you have great erections, great libido, great sensation, and great climax, there's a lot of information on the web that you should probably avoid. Because actually, I mean, there's a number of reasons why people can't dial in when they come to me for coaching. I've listened to the information that they have consumed, which has driven their protocol. And not only should you know the strategy to dial in, high DHT, in-range estradiol, functional testicles, a little bit of DHEA, but you should also know the things to avoid, because there's information out there on the web that's purported by mainly YouTube folks and some folks that parrot that information on Reddit that will absolutely positively prevent you from dialing in. You will stay not dialed in if you listen to this information and you take these purported truths and think they're true and execute them. They're actually false. It's bullshit. So I'm going to break down 5 of the major ones because this really matters. I'm talking about things like injection frequency. You really think it matters? I'm going to explain that it really doesn't. T to E ratios. Oh, let's get into that. Pregnenolone on TRT. We're going to get into that. Steady state. Proviron. Whole bunch of things. Sit back, relax, grab a beer, my friend, because I'm going to break down the 5 top BS myths that stop people from dialing in on TRT. Let's get into it. Meantime, before we start the video, look, Cortex Labs is a TRT guidance and sexual dysfunction resolution company. Got a range of different products, as you see on the homepage, broken down. Everything from the source list, which gets you everything you need anabolic-wise, including DHT. Look, some people just need that to dial in their TRT protocols. Go get it at livecortex.com. If you need to dial in on Test Cream, I built the master course to show you specifically how to dial in libido and erections on testosterone cream. Same thing with testosterone cypionates. And lastly, I am a coach on TRT with 4 different prime packages, one being a consult, which gets you 3 to 5 action routes to fix sexual dysfunction on TRT, and the others being coaching. We will fix the erections, we will fix the libido. You can book any of those things in under a minute at livecortex.com. Okay, so just as the right information to dial in sexual function and to dial in well-being on TRT is critically necessary for you to be able to achieve that, it's also about avoiding the wrong information. And look, I know it is difficult to determine who to trust when there are people talking about their experiences with TRT on the web, and there's people with all these kind of radical ideologies like you should never manage estrogen. Folks think you should take pregnenolone. Some folks are prescribing or suggesting people dose like upwards of 75 to 100 milligrams of DHEA in a TRT protocol, which I find absolutely unnecessary and is only going to mess things up. So there's a lot of information that will just steer you in the wrong direction, and they're all ideas. And I'm going to break down 5 of those ideas in this video so you don't get steered in the wrong direction when you're trying to dial in on TRT. All right, listen up. Number 1, injection frequency matters. Injection frequency. You know, there's a myth out there that suggests that, look, if you're dosing 150, 175 cypionate per week, that as long as you just inject it daily, just in little micro amounts, that you're going to end up with like in-range estradiol, and that will fix your sexual dysfunction that you're experiencing on 175 milligrams of testosterone because you're injecting once a week or twice a week. Now, look, there's truth to the idea that if you inject in smaller amounts, but the same total amount per week, you're just doing it every day in, 15 milligram doses versus once a week of some bolus injection, that the estradiol is going to be lower. There's truth to that. However, if you're up there in the 150, 160, 170, 200, milligrams of cypionate or enanthate per week, if you change that from once a week to everyday injections, the estradiol is still going to be above range. It's not a significant enough of a reduction in the peak to where you're just going to land at 27, which is like a great sweet spot for sexual function for men on TRT, assuming you have high enough DHT. That's not how it works. Truth of the matter is, frequent injections, especially 130 plus per week, is going to keep you at a constant level of estradiol. As natties, the reason we function sexually is obviously good enough DHT, really bioavailable DHT, but also estrogen doesn't go over range when we're natural, typically. The reason that happens is because when we peak in testosterone in the morning, we don't stay peaked. We have a peak in the morning, and then we start troughing at nighttime. We have swings as a natty, by the way, in the 2 to 450 nanograms per deciliter range, sometimes 500. So we have these pretty big swings after we have our peak because we have a trough. Therefore, we can't get steady state estradiol. Therefore, it ultimately ends up lowering through the night. We wake up with erections because of that, and then we peak again. Estradiol, therefore, can't accumulate at the tissue level and in the serum. If you have constant estradiol and no trough, especially if it's over range, but sometimes if it's at the top of the range, sexual function is going to be muted to some extent. And I want to posit this argument for you folks. Some folks say about this, like a lot of the proponents of never manage estrogen, say that the blood, so how much estrogen is in your serum, is not an accurate surrogate for what's happening at the tissue level. And that's actually true. We can't measure what's happening at penile tissue and brain tissue and cardiac tissue in terms of estradiol. We don't have the tools to do that. Or at least it's not been invested upon, and you can't find that in the literature. If said people say that the blood doesn't matter and it matters at the tissue, well, constant steady state estradiol, they should recognize that's going to equal oversaturation of estradiol at the tissue level, where it allegedly matters in this argument. So in and of itself, the idea that steady state, never getting a break of estradiol is like smart is contradicted purely via oversaturation and steady state of estradiol at the tissue level, where it does matter. Yes, the blood is a surrogate for what's happening at the tissues, not entirely an accurate surrogate. But what you want to look at in the blood is, if it peaks, okay, great, but then it troughs back down. That's your indicator that it's actually working better at the tissues because the tissues get a break. The only time that I have seen frequent injections actually make sense is in lower end doses of TRT where estrogen's already falling close to range. Maybe it could be a little bit over. Then you capitalize on that 120 milligram dose by breaking it up into daily injections. So therefore you get even less of a peak of estradiol, you get a break at the tissues, and you end up in the sweet spot for sexual function. Because this is what matters here. Overages of estradiol are going to meet your sexual function. Now, don't take my word for it. Just go listen to all the people that say you don't have to manage it, and when you have ED, come back to this channel. When it comes to higher doses of long esters, you're actually better off doing infrequent injections. I have seen this to be true. Same dose, call it 140 milligrams a week of testosterone cypionate. Done daily, the estradiol is a little higher. Okay? Done once a week, the estrogen ends up 7 to 10 points lower. Why? Because you have a trough in between and you're not constantly converting androgens into estradiol. So this is how people make infrequent injections work sometimes. 140 a week, 150 a week, sometimes even 200 a week for rare anomalies. They just inject it once a week, they get a peak, and then everything drops back down and the estradiol lands in range. They're not constantly steady state anything, and they get a break from aromatization. The tissues are able to regulate and sexual function regulates. So injection frequency, listen, unless you're in the lower end doses, it's really not helping you is the main point that I want to make. So if you're stuck on, I need to be at 175, I like the androgenic feel or whatever, and then I'm going to go on daily injections to prevent these estrogen peaks, and that's going to dial me in. And 3 months later, you're not dialed in. That's why. Okay, it's still steady state estradiol, and you need to lower it. Number 2 myth, and this is a big one. I mean, this is one that will confuse people for years. They'll stay not dialed in on TRT for fucking years. And that is that as long as you have an adequate TDE ratio, whatever the proponents suggest it is, I don't even know what they're suggesting the TDE ratio should be, then you should be fine. The main argument is your body proportionally converts testosterone to estradiol based on the amount of testosterone you have. So if you're injecting 200 a week or 350 a week, and you end up at 2,000 nanograms per deciliter total testosterone with 500 free testosterone, well, your body's just going to convert the overages testosterone into estradiol because that's what it does, and that's what it's built to do. Yeah, that's true. It is going to do that. You are going to make 85 picograms per milliliter of estradiol with those, total test numbers or higher, God forbid. That doesn't mean that it's good. The body does all kinds of things. If you take a dopamine reuptake inhibitor, right, something that blocks the dopamine transporter so that you accumulate dopamine in the synapses of your brain in excessive quantities compared to your baseline, do you know what your brain does in response to that? There's a region of the brain called the ventral tegmental area, which projects dopamine throughout the rest of the brain. That region downregulates its production of dopamine because your brain thinks, oh, I have all this dopamine in the synapses, I don't need to make as much. And so here's this homeostatic response, just like estradiol rises in proportion to testosterone. But it doesn't mean it's a good thing. It is, in fact, a bad thing when the ventral tegmental area of your brain stops making as much dopamine. Same thing with an SSRI. If you take citalopram, sertraline, any of these selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, you inhibit the serotonin transporter, accumulate more serotonin in the synapses of your brain, and then you downregulate the production of serotonin in the RAF nuclei. It actually lowers its serotonin output. So here you have a homeostatic physiologic response to excess serotonin, which isn't a good thing. It's not a good thing for the serotonin projection centers of the brain to stop making as much serotonin. This is a bad thing. We cannot act, this is just not how physiology works. We cannot act as if the body just deals with overages of hormones or overages of chemicals in its own way, which regulates things out. If your blood pressure is too high, does your body just deal with it? Does it have inborn mechanisms by which it just lowers the blood pressure at the organ level, the brain level, the penile tissue level, otherwise organ level? No. If you end up with too much LDL cholesterol, like say it's like 150, 175, 200, even 125. Does your body just deal with that? Does it just take, it's like, okay, so you're loading up on saturated fat and say you're, taking a bunch of androgens or something like, and you've got elevated LDL. Does your body just like know how to deal with that? And you still end up healthy? Well, if it's raw input in, well, then it's raw input out in terms of increasing LDL. Is that just normal? Well, yeah, it is a normal physiologic process, but that doesn't fucking mean it's good. Do you understand what I'm saying here? Just because, you have a certain TDE ratio and you've got loads of testosterone and your body will naturally convert a lot of that testosterone into estradiol does not indicate that that is a good thing. Show me somewhere in the scientific literature where it suggests that's a good thing. It's just a mechanism by which your body operates. It doesn't mean it's good. And it's always not good to have super elevated estradiol in the context of TRT. You're going to have sexual dysfunction. Number 3 myth is that you even need pregnenolone on TRT. A lot of where this comes from is that folks are having anxiety with especially long esters. Sometimes the introduction of testosterone cream, because it's like a potent, quick, swift peak of androgens, test and DHT. And so, folks, especially if they're not used to that, get a degree of overstimulation that may give them anxiety, may give them head pressure, may make their brain feel like it's got fucking vice grips around it. So, some people, proponents of pregnenolone, suggest taking pregnenolone because it does have some action on the GABA A receptors, and that will balance that out. And in some cases, they're right. That doesn't mean that's good because pregnenolone converts heavily to progesterone, which inhibits the 5-alpha reductase enzymes. So by doing that, by not finding an alternate route to deal with your anxiety, like fixing your fucking protocol as an example, switching esters or getting estrogen dialed in, or ultimately just getting used to that, the stimulation sometimes tends to just work its way down. Your body adjusts and you're good to go. Some folks are suggesting taking loads of pregnenolone, which is going to end up making loads of progesterone or more than you should make as a man. By the way, you should make not a lot of progesterone as a man. And then you're going to start blocking the conversion of testosterone into DHT, which is going to cause you erectile failure and libido problems. Listen, as long as you have a base level of HCG in your protocol, you do not need pregnenolone. Even if you don't have HCG in your protocol, you don't need to be dosing pregnenolone on TRT. Find another way to deal with your anxiety, whether it's addressing your neurological issues, GABA deficiency problems, GABA firing problems, excessive glutamate problems, otherwise problems. Again, a bad TRT protocol. Don't take pregnenolone on TRT, boys. It is not going to help you, and it usually is going to make things bad. The fourth myth, which is it's just complete bullshit. I'm really not even sure how the TRT community got swayed into this direction, is that steady state hormones is better. First of all, considering natties peak in the morning and then trough at night when it comes to testosterone as well as estradiol, how did we come up with that, right? How are we justifying that, like, somehow on TRT steady state is better? Considering natural men and natural diurnal testosterone secretion does not work this way. You are not steady state. You swing in the 200 to 500 nanogram per deciliter range throughout the day after you peak. That's how you end up having sexual function, good sexual function when you're natty, because you don't constantly aromatize. You know, you get a trough. Troughs are critical, my friend. I'm going to explain to you what oversaturation, meaning consistent steady state, actually does to the system, to the endocrine system, to the sex organs relative to estradiol, and how that's not good. Usually, oversaturation of androgens via steady state hormone levels equals both an oversaturation of E2 at the tissues. If you get that at penile tissue, you got estrogen receptor alpha inhibiting nitric oxide signaling and giving you erectile dysfunction. But at the same time, what I've seen in steady state people coming to me for coaching when I get to actually look at their markers is steady state cumulatively increases the estradiol over time because you never get a trough. So you can't work back down. Your liver and your body is clearing estradiol, attempting to, from the system as much as every day, multiple times a day. But it cannot do that adequately if you have a sieve, an ongoing faucet of aromatization taking place via steady state hormones. So not only do you get overages of estradiol at the tissues, you get a cumulative increase in a lot of cases of estrogen in the blood from steady state. At the same time, steady state, hormones, this is where folks end up having the common side effects associated with TRT that the literature warns us about, like elevated H&H, hemoglobin and hematocrit, elevated blood pressure, and otherwise problems like skewed lipids. Yeah, if you're super steady state and you get no trough, you get no break. I have seen people on long esters, steady state, have high hematocrit. Then they switch to testosterone cream where they get a trough, the hematocrit problem goes away. It's back down to 48 where it was 52. Seen the same thing with blood pressure. People at 145, 150, over 85, 90, elevated blood pressure. They just moved to a fast-acting ester where they're actually getting a trough and they're no longer steady state and the blood pressure problems resolve. Peaks and troughs, okay? Give the central nervous system a degree of contrast. As I explained in recent videos, you just take the same amount of caffeine per day, like in coffee, you're eventually just going to kind of get used to it. The brain has no contrast. You go off of it for 3 weeks, you bring an espresso back in after that, suddenly I notice the caffeine. Central nervous system, dopamine, needs contrast. Generally, as an aside, this is a strategy that I've learned to be true. What you want to do on peak and trough is you want to keep E2 in range on both times. So when you're peaking, listen, if it goes to 35, 37, that's okay, but it should trough around 24, 25 picograms per milliliter. That's okay. Ideally, you peak at about 30 and you trough at like 20 to 25. That's the sweet spot zone for sexual function, my friends. Steady state is not better. It is not inherently better. There is no logical argument there, considering especially what it does regarding estrogen saturation at the tissues, estrogen accumulation in the serum, the increases in H&H and BP. There's no argument for steady state being better. It is a fucking misnomer, and I don't want you guys to get caught up in it. Last myth. There are plenty of myths, but these are kind of the salient ones that I want to get across. Proviron fixes sexual function on TRT. Listen, if you approach dialing in your protocol with a lack of nuance and that if you just take some pill, it's going to fix your erection problems on TRT, you're going to have a hell of a time dialing in. You probably won't. If you're at 200 milligrams a week of testosterone or even 170, 150 in some cases, and your E2's at 55, and you're throwing down 25 milligrams Proviron thinking, I have sexual dysfunction. I read on Reddit or heard on the internet that Proviron fixes sexual dysfunction on TRT. Let me take 25 milligrams. Well, guess what? Maybe the E2 drops 5 to 7 points, 3 to 4 points. So now what? You're at 51, 49 picograms per milliliter of estradiol. You get more DHT input, but as we know, estrogen blocks the DHT-like effects if it's too high. You still end up with sexual dysfunction, and now you're getting a little hair loss from the Proviron. If you're at 50 estradiol, or in some cases 40 estradiol, a mere 25 milligrams of Proviron is not going to fix this. You are going to need, on those higher end-ish doses of testosterone, you're going to need like kind of unhealthy or at least side effect inducing doses of Proviron in order to lower the E2 enough and give you that DHT-like effect. Something in the tune of, at the low end, 50 to on the high end, 100 milligrams. So somewhere in the middle, 75 milligrams of Proviron a day. You don't want to be taking that. You're going to nuke your fucking hair, first of all. You're going to be loaded with acne, secondly. Yes, you will get some estrogen reduction and some aromatase inhibition, which Proviron induces, and that may actually balance out the sexual function, but it comes at the cost of this other stuff, and there's much more efficient ways to do this. Proviron can fix sexual dysfunction on TRT, but it's context-specific, boys. You can't just look at it and go, Proviron apparently fixes sexual function. No matter what my protocol is, let me just take some Proviron and fix the sexual function. It doesn't work that way. If you're at 120 milligrams a week of testosterone, however you're injecting it, whatever frequency, and estradiol is at 37, and you're like, wow, I'm close. I can get it up for penetrative sex. My libido's like, okay. Climax is okay. None of it's like great. If you then run 25 milligrams of Proviron, you might bump that E2 down to 31, 32, maybe 27. And then you get your sexual function back. Then you're in the zone. If you're at 100 milligrams a week and E2 is like at 32, you take 25 milligrams per Proviron a day, you get it down to 25, you get that more DHT, especially then you're at the lower doses to get estrogen to range. Usually don't have enough DHT with long esters. They're not very DHT centric, by the way, which makes them inferior. Then you bring in 25 milligrams per Proviron. Then you have enough of that DHT like input at the AR and the gene expression level. Well, then you dial in. You're not dialing in with 25 of Proviron at 200 milligrams a test or even 150 a test. It just usually doesn't work out because it's not enough to reduce the estrogen to where it needs to be. All right, so those are the primary myths. I am about giving you strategy to dial in. That is what all of our products are about. That is what all of this content is about. But one critical element of dialing in is not taking some of the bad advice that will keep you in a purgatory of never dialing in. You got to be so careful with this stuff. You take the wrong advice. You get into some ideology. You want to simplify your protocol by not managing estradiol and thinking that your thyroid's going to do it. You're going to end up with ED. You're going to be in a date context with a girl and you're not going to be able to get it up. And guess what? It's over at that point, brother. Be selective about the information that you're consuming out there on the internet. Those are 5 primary myths that take people in the wrong direction, and it's painful, and it's hard for me to watch. I want to prevent as many people as possible from going in that direction. All right, as I said in the beginning, Cortex Labs is a company that I built designed to fix sexual dysfunction on TRT. We also work with people that have taken hair loss drugs. We've got a range of different products. Look, go to the homepage and see coaching, source list, anything you can think of regarding anabolics, especially DHT. A lot of people just need to put raw DHT on the testicles and it dials them in. A video course called Mastering Testosterone Cream, which will dial you in terms of libido and erections on test cream. Get that course, man. Stop wasting time. LiveCortex.com. Mastering Testosterone Sipinate, another video course that shows you how to dial in on that long ester, which is very hard. I recently just bundled together the Mastering Testosterone Cream course as well as source list, okay? So you can get them both now for cheaper than what you would pay for them individually if you bought them both together, okay? So I'm saving you money right there. Lastly, coaching. Listen, if you need to fix sexual dysfunction and you don't want to go at it alone, you'd just rather stop wasting time and have a professional that's been doing this for years dial in your libido, your erections, your sensation, your climax. Go read the reviews. Go check out the coaching packages. The most popular one lately is the Sexual Function Protocol Blueprint. Single session consult with me, 30-minute call, deep fact finding, 3 to 5 tailored action routes on an online document, TRT protocol tracker to dial you in terms of sexual function. For the pesky, longer-standing problems, and if you want one-on-one coaching with me, I've got a 3-month TRT sexual function restoration intensive We'll get the job done. Book me, underaminutelifecortex.com. We're on the fact-finding call as soon as the next day for the real advanced stuff. I mean, it's stuff that hasn't responded to anything, just significant erectile dysfunction, substantially muted libido. Go for 6 months if you have the budget, okay? This is an advanced TRT, sexual function restoration coaching program. You can book any of this stuff in underaminutelifecortex.com. Again, we're on the fact-finding call as soon as that day or the next day. And then we begin. Hope you guys had a great weekend. It's been an absolute pleasure hanging out with you. Much more content coming soon. Remember, keep in mind, I am in the process of building the most comprehensive playbook for dialing in libido and erections on TRT on any ester. Every ester. It's called Mastering Libido and Erections on TRT. It's got protocol labs for every ester, full deep dive breakdowns, the DHT estradiol axis, long, detailed, comprehensive decision trees on how to dial in every ester. You're going to want to snag this. It's going to be available in about a week or so look forward to that. All right, like the video, sub to the channel. I'd love to have you on board. We're a rapidly growing channel. And brother, the more the merrier, man. Let's get this information out to everybody. Otherwise, kick ass, rock on, enjoy the rest of your day. More content coming this week. And I'll talk to you boys on the next one.